Hey everyone, welcome to the Do Nothing Pod. I'm so grateful you're joining in today for this special series on leadership. This idea was presented to me by Ashish Kulshrestha, and I learned about Ashish through one of my guests on the Do Nothing Pod, Thupten Jinpa, who is the founder of the Compassionate Institute, which came out of Stanford University. And Jinpa was also the English translator for the Dalai Lama for many, many years. Ashish, also well accomplished, spending time with Fortune 100 companies over his career, currently with KPMG as a director in the advisory strategy part of their practice. He had an idea. His idea was, I wonder how the world can look different post-COVID. How can we lead differently? And maybe we could have a conversation about what that might look like. And along with Jinpa, we've had some conversations, and the two of them, and including myself, have compiled a guest list that I think is going to be very interesting for you. We've got thought leaders from around the world that will be joining me as I facilitate the conversation around this post-COVID leadership, and again, how we can show up in a different way and realize our interconnectedness in a much deeper way. And so with that, we'll start it off with Ashish and Jinpa. The two of us, the three of us, I should say, spent about an hour talking a bit about what this can look like and what we might expect from the series. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. And without further ado, here's Ashish and Jinpa. Well, it's exciting to have you two here, Ashish and Jinpa. Thank you. And this is an interesting topic that you've brought up, and I'm so grateful that you're starting this conversation and that we're going to extend this beyond the three of us. And Jinpa, during our initial discussion on this topic, I remember you referencing the name of a New York Times article entitled "The Great Reset." And I wondered, what is it about that title that resonated with you?
Well, first of all, it's a real joy, and I would like to thank you, Rob, for taking up on the proposal that Ashish and I made. And the original idea actually came from Ashish. While I was thinking about sort of, wishing for something like this to happen, Ashish reached out to me and say, hey, I'm thinking along these lines, and key element here seems to be how do we respond, seems to be the leadership part. And leaders are not really just leaders in a conventional sense, but everyone can lead. But one perspective that is being, not included in the equation is really the human perspective, and maybe can we start a conversation? So, and we reached out to you, Rob. So for at the beginning, let me thank you. For really kind of embracing this. The thing that really sort of intrigued me with that, the title of that New York Times opinion piece was the idea of resetting. And I really liked it because what has happened is that the COVID-19 really swept the whole world almost as if we were unprepared. And one thing that it really kind of shook us is the realization that we haven't fully appreciated what are the deeper implications of having a truly interconnected world, where a product can be designed in such a way that one piece can be bought, material can be bought somewhere, the manufacturing can be done somewhere, the marketing could be done another way, conception of it could be done one way, and then it could be shipped wherever you want. And there was this, and you can do this in a world as if there is no borders, and also, and this is a purely value-free market force where we don't need to worry about how the people are being treated in one part of the world, the workers and so on, so long as the products can travel through seamlessly. And then similarly, along with the products, people travel, the businesses, and I travel a fair bit as part of my work. And so you can, with a plane, be in one part of the world in another part of the world within a day. So in this world, the truly interconnected nature had implications, and this COVID-19 crisis reminded us that we had not fully appreciated what the implications were. Because there has been some critical response to the globalization, primarily from the economic kind of side, but there were the humanitarian, the health side, the moral issues, many of these. So the idea that somehow this crisis may help us completely rethink, it's like a sort of a resetting your computer. Most of us, until the Apple Mac machines came, majority of us were using PC, and PC, sometimes you have these things that just doesn't work. And the best thing is to just switch it off and reset it. And things work back. So I think I've always loved this idea of reset. And these days with the routers, we know that sometimes when it's too slow, you go and reset your router. So that phrase intrigued me. And so when Ashish reached out to me, I thought, this is exactly what probably this guy means. And maybe this is exactly what Ashish has in mind. So that really sort of triggered, enthused me further for trying to see, can there be conversations about this kind, which has to really transcend national boundaries? Because these conversations really has to be about humanity,
Yeah.
not about this continent, this nation, that nation, or this people or that people. These conversations really have to find a way to move at the level of common humanity. So that's why that I love that phrase, resetting, the great reset.
Ashish, Jinpa mentioned us as a society being interconnected. Can you define exactly what that means? And do we truly understand as a society how truly interconnected we are?
So first of all, let me also begin with profound thanks, Rob, just to resonate briefly what Jimpa said. While a constant kind of a lack of peace in me have been telling for a long time that better actions at different levels in our society are due to face this pandemic and the times to follow. But with Jimpa's help, you have given us a medium to reach to a larger masses. So thank you for that. Interconnected, it's the realization is kind of always there. So if you talk from science perspective, the famous EPR experiment from 100 years back, the quantum entanglement, it shows that. And then I truly believe that every human being on the planet at some point in their life, when they were mindful enough, paying attention enough, they saw the interconnectedness. It's only when we are filled with destructive or negative emotions or not mindful enough, then we often forget how interconnected we are. And interconnected, in a simple layman terms, is just, how one individual action is impacting everything else in the surrounding atmosphere, or in today's world on the other side of the world. So I think we pretty much all have experienced it. It's just that how we can be mindful enough to be aware of it at all waking moment of our life. And oftentimes, due to conflict of interest, leadership at different levels, they have limited constituents. So while they may understand the interconnectedness, but they can conveniently forget that part and move on with the more disconnected word or the disconnected constituents of benefit of their decision. So I hope with this medium, we can give people enough courage, enough, as you call it, nuggets of wisdom, that they have a more constant presence of this realization that how interconnected we are. And then with that realization, we take some meaningful action to empower the larger masses, which again goes back to how it benefits the human condition in this crisis and the world to follow. Because if we keep on focusing on limited interest or more often economic interest, then we are often ignoring the underlying human condition.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. I think to a listener, they might think, That makes complete sense. The question one might have is, how can I better cultivate that skill and, actually feel more deeply connected to, say, a stranger, someone we don't even know? Ashish, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the question is, how can I be fearless, or how can I be compassionate towards somebody I don't know? So again, the answer is there in various ancient traditions. So for me, coming from India, our common gesture to greet when we meet somebody, whether known or unknown, is namaste. So while in today's time it's gaining some popularity because it helps in social distancing, however, it has a very profound and deep meaning, acknowledging or greeting somebody with namaste. So nam means to acknowledge or to bow down, and aste means to recognizing that self in me is the same as self in you. So you begin the conversation with a deep understanding that you are no different than me. So I can only wish you more joy, and I cannot wish you any harm. So different cultures, like Jinpa is also, aware from like the Zulu tradition, Untu, Buntu, I am because we are. And then back to, Jinpala's book, he actually has a chapter in there, just like me. So, if you begin every conversation or every thought process with the fact that the person you are concerned about, or the person in front of you, whether a stranger or not, is no different than who you are, then that gives the foundation. So, and again, from experience, I can say that, it's not consistent with me. And when it's not consistent, then, I'm not at my best when those moments when I'm not beginning with that understanding, versus when I'm beginning with that understanding, then, I'm always on the positive emotions, always on the compassion, always thinking the good for the others. And that just leads to wonderful result of whatever action you may take.
Mm-hmm. Jinpa, do you feel that these ideas will resonate with society as a whole?
But in some sense, we don't really have a choice if we don't embrace it, because the world we have chosen to create is a truly interconnected world. It's very different from the medieval world where nations can remain independent and wage war against each other, and someone else's victory loss is your gain. But we have chosen to create this truly interconnected world, partly driven by advances in technology as well as commerce, moving beyond small neighborhood regions and including the entire world, and then being assisted by fast transportation and communication technology. So in this new reality, I don't think we can ever retreat back to the old days when we can live more autonomously on a regional basis. So this means if we are going to face to the reality of our current world, then interconnectedness is something, whether we like it or not, it is there. And it's not just interconnected at the surface level, it's a deep interconnectedness. We know, for example, when, during the lockdown, certain items could not be, available because the production line and the supply chain is no longer there. We know how interconnectedness impacted us, not just at a psychological and emotional level, but actually on a practical day-to-day survival level. So in this world, unless we are willing to go back a couple of centuries, maybe a century or two, and radically redo the world, which I think is unlikely because history tends to always move forward, not backwards. And also, any new inventions, you cannot uninvent it. That has never been done. So once the inventions are there, technologies are there, the reality has been set, we as a society and human species, we have not been able to move with the reality that we have created. So this pandemic has really created a sort of given us a shock. It's almost like a shock therapy. It has woken us up and laid bare to us the deep interconnectedness of our actual reality, and saying, hey, pay attention now. You are truly interconnected. but you haven't mentally and psychologically and emotionally made adjustment to this new reality. So I think, once people begin to realize this, and also the whole international structure, the norms that govern relationship, these also need to reflect the need to embrace this new reality. And if we're able to do this, then we will probably have a better future. But if we don't, we cannot choose to have an interconnected world at the reality level and choose psychologically and emotionally and attitudinally choose to see ourselves as independent and isolated. That just doesn't work. And this dysfunction, kind of disjunct between what is the actual reality and how we perceive and how we relate to it, is going to be the source of problem. Conflicts arise there, differences arises there, and us and them thinking arises there. So my hope is that's why I like the word reset, that this shock that has been created by the pandemic experience crisis will wake us up so that we will at least recognize that the reality is truly interconnected. Now we need to take the step to change human consciousness and attitudes and adapt so that at least we are closer to that reality. So my own sense is that this is something that we don't really have a much choice if we want to save ourselves as a species. I think in the end, I think it's not so much a moral question or a spiritual question. To some extent it is, but I think it's also a survival question, moving forward.
Yeah. Ashish, when one is, let's say, a citizen in a country, say they're in Russia and they're in Moscow, and they're going about their day, and there's a person in Barcelona, in Spain, and then there's another person in Vancouver, Canada. How can each one of those three who are going about their day and sort of living in their bubble start to think beyond their bubble, in that their actions could actually have an impact on those two others who are across the world?
Maybe intentionally you are asking me difficult question, Rob.
I'm glad I get to ask them.
Yeah, so for me, as at my own practice level, I can describe it more easily. However, I realize that not everybody's life may be as simple as mine. So for me, in part of the daily practice, there's a prayer for everybody in the world and even beyond in the whole cosmos, all beings, all matter. And then the practice throughout the day is to remember that. And often I forget, I'm not a master of anything yet. So, if I remember that, then like yesterday, I ordered something from Amazon, which arrived, and it was made in China. So I just thought that I'm going to write them. So the manufacturer included a small note, asking for the feedback. So I'm going to write them an email today, first expressing my gratitude that they have been working under some of the tough conditions to fulfill the requirements of our world on the completely opposite side of the planet, and also ask their well-being and the well-being of their employees. So that was a thoughtful moment, but in my worst moment, I may not think about that. So I think that for me, the answer is really be thoughtful to begin with some moments, and then slowly take it for all the moments. Mm-hmm. So whether you are in Russia or Spain or in Canada, the interconnectedness is there. Are we seeing it? Are we mindful enough to see it? Mm-hmm. So clearly, we all breathe the same air. It's just that, while the distance, from me sitting here in Dallas to Russia could be, several thousand miles, but the atmosphere is only like 100 miles up there. So, we are definitely connected very closely by the environment versus the physical distance between us. And then a lot of our social economic distances are highly interdependent, as Jinpa mentioned earlier. So, while there is a distress and, lack of harmony in some part of the world, like we woke up this morning with a fire in Minnesota, police station, it's not too far. That's like next door to us. So whatever is happening over there, we cannot wake up and say that it does not matter to me. Everything matters to us. It's just a matter of time, how soon it comes to us. So that's kind of my practice, and that may not be the perfect answer for the audience, but that I can relate from my own experience. So it's just simply work diligently on expanding your moments from few seconds of realization of interconnectedness to making it almost a constant on a daily basis.
One of the beautiful things that you said, which to me is such a simple practice, is the reaching out to the manufacturer and thanking them and wishing them well, and even in your own mind maybe going through the thought process that there are other people with families and all the lives that they're living, and wishing them well from your seat there in Dallas. And that's a really simple practice that one can do. Another thought that arose for me was there's this documentary that I saw not too long ago called One Strange Rock. And they had interviewed these astronauts that had spent time up in the space shuttle. And they talk about what a life-changing event this has been, not just because they were in space, but really more so realizing the interconnectedness of things, looking down on this strange rock that we sit on. And their description of how truly interconnected as it circles around, and you can see the ozone layer and all the, how it all affects each other. So, Jinpa, I wanted to, please.
Sorry. So there's also this idea of analysis of a life cycle of a product. So in fact, there are cute experiments you can do yourself. There are a couple of websites, and so you can choose any modern product and trace the life cycle to see how many nodes there are in the connection that makes it possible for that thing to be on your desk or in your palm, which I think is a really simple way of just appreciating how deeply interconnected we are. And then a cynic may say, well, so what's the big deal? This is all driven by market forces. People are doing this because everybody's getting something out of it. Why should I care? But then the question is, the one fact is that at least one cannot deny that there are so many chains in that interconnection. And that is the new reality we're living in, which also makes us understand that the human life in our time is a complex life. It's not a simple life where you can say, I don't care about what happens to the rest of the world, because what happens to the rest of the world truly matters to us. Pandemic is an extreme example of this, but there will be a simpler example. But pandemic is a very powerful, extreme example. What happened in one part of the world truly matters to everyone. Even if we are fortunate enough to be not directly exposed to the virus, but we have all suffered the consequences of the lockdown, the economic consequences and social relationship consequences and so on. So I think now is a time to really bring out this idea of deep interconnectedness in a powerful way that is very concrete. Because often when we talk about interconnectedness, for a lot of people, it just remains a concept. But the global pandemic has really shown us a concrete reality of what that means. So, and another thing is that, as Ashish pointed out, it's really each of us can choose to make it more aware in our life. It is there. Whether we pay attention to it and bring it to our mind is up to us. But I would argue that if we pay attention, bring it into our awareness, we will also feel more connected emotionally with other fellow human beings. We will also feel less lonely. And we will also feel less tempted to extreme emotions that are divisive, us versus them, which is what leads to antagonism and hostility towards others who are defined as the other. So all of this, the more we open to the awareness of interconnectedness, and along with it will also come recognition of common humanity. It doesn't really matter how we look like, whether we are kind of white or black or yellow or this nation or that nation. When we strip down all the differences that are part of our identity, we get to the fundamental level, which is our human reality. We're all exactly the same. And that's why your example of the astronauts, powerful, it's almost like a kind of a spiritual awakening of the oneness of this tiny rock, and so many wars have been fought for these invisible borders, for the sake of protecting and guarding them. And I can see the power of an astronaut. It's probably, I don't know whether they have described it, but one could almost describe these experiences spiritual, deep spiritual awakening, to recognize the futility of all that emotion and fierce divisiveness that is brought upon on artificially drawn boundaries. So I think, even from a self-interest point of view, the more we choose to connect with others beyond our immediate border, the less lonely and happier we will be. That I think is in the end probably the most powerful argument to make a case.
Ashish, some of our basic needs are important for our happiness. And one I wanted to ask you about is healthcare. And how important is healthcare in this discussion? And you have a friend, I believe, or somebody that you know who's done some amazing things in India. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about Dr. Anat Kumar. I hope I said that right, who is the founder of LifeSpring.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, healthcare is one of the noblest profession in the mankind. Pretty much everybody I know who is in healthcare, when they chose to make a decision, their intent was as pure as possible. They meant well. Unfortunately, by the time you get into the actual profession, the system and the incentives and the leadership which has evolved sometimes create conflict. And some healthcare professionals can navigate through those conflicts and still deliver meaningful results to their patients. And for some healthcare professionals, they sometimes get lost in the maze and end up having conflict of interest. So in this pandemic, we have already seen great heroic stories. On the other side, there are some sad stories of short-term profit taking and manipulating the system to achieve some near-term goals. The story you are talking about, so Dr. Anand Kumar, who I spoke a while ago, and hopefully you could be one of the speakers in the future series. So they have this organization called LifeSpring, and their goal is to offer a dignified pregnancy and delivery experience for poor people in India. So they have a chain of hospitals. So anybody can go there, and they start from the prenatal care, from the time you conceive a baby, from the time you deliver, and also the postpartum care for a couple of weeks. And they have accomplished this. I recently checked the website after our initial discussion. I think their cost right now is 12,000 rupees for the whole process, which is a little over 150, 160 US dollars for the whole process. And they do it completely as a non-profit. So they have so many sponsors. So the cost to the actual women and families is zero, whether it's a cesarean or a normal labor delivery. So, these are very good example to me, because it's a very self-sustaining model, even though the money is raised from the non-beneficiaries. So since they have kept the cost model so low, so with the human ingenuity and innovation, they are not compromising the quality of care, but they are still able to deliver great results for the low cost. So, and contrary, when the COVID-19 arrived back in February, the test itself in US was over $3,000. And as we have more entrants and some government subsidy, the recent cost I see was like about $120 for COVID here, versus in India, the cost is about 12 rupees right now, which is a little more than 17 cents. So, it's just, and I'm not suggesting that we go and get the cheapest cost in the world. It's just that, in order to get more widespread testing, we have to certainly make it more affordable. And that ingenuity and that innovation thought process exists everywhere, not just in one particular country or region. So the moment you put your focus on the humanitarian causes versus your current corporate goals and belief, you can attain that. And the beautiful thing is that these are sustaining things. The volume you gain eventually give you bigger sustaining power than the limited high price models. You can only serve a slim section of the society, and eventually those models collapse. Mm-hmm. So with utmost regard for all the healthcare professionals in the world in this crisis and before, I think to Jimpa's original point, this is an opportunity to reset and rethink that can this country sustain 25-30% of the GDP as just the cost of healthcare. So I hope that reset provides some meaningful alternatives for times to come.
Yeah. In talking about the interconnectedness, when you see the videos of, say New York City in the US, where at a certain time each day, everybody goes out in their balconies or opens their windows and they're cheering these healthcare professionals that they don't know and can't see way down there. Maybe some can see them, but in how far that meaning goes, you can really feel the interconnectedness in that action. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Jinpa, you are the founder of the Compassionate Institute, and you're the author of a book called A Fearless Heart, How the Courage to be Compassionate Can Transform Our Lives. And for those that need some science behind these sort of actions, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what you've learned about the science of compassion and how that's evolved over the years.
Well, thank you. And before I respond to your specific question, I would like to pick up on the discussion on healthcare. One of the interesting things about human nature is that for whatever reasons, societies get set on doing a certain way of doing things, whatever it is, and then once those systems are in place, they're very difficult to change because people look at precedents, and there is always this idea that you stick with the devil that you know. And we know what the ins and outs of this particular way of doing things is. We don't know the unknown. So the unknowns are way more threatening than the limitations of the old way of doing things. So, for example, like Ashish brought up the point about in the US, how almost 30% of the GDP goes to healthcare. That's a massive slice of the GDP. But then the fundamental question is, are the American citizens getting a value for spending that much of a portion of the GDP compared to, say, Europe or Canada or other parts of the world? Those questions are difficult to raise when business are usual. The pandemic has created a new reality where America as a society can ask those difficult questions, because this pandemic crisis has completely upended. It has really shown the major fault lines in the systems, not just in the healthcare, but many other areas. The fact that, for example, even though nobody's immune, no race is immune to the disease, but when it comes to the mortality rate, we see that the proportion is much higher among the blacks and the other minorities. Now, clearly, that speaks That's reflects something very deep inequity in this society itself, which probably are related to a deeper norms that are part of business as usual. So I think these are the things where I feel that the individual societies and the world, we need to seize the moment, for the reset. And historically, if you look at many of the great spiritual teachers, whether it is Jesus Christ's teaching or the Buddha, or many of the important teachers, the most of the great spiritual awakening has occurred triggered by suffering. So a major suffering is at the heart of giving rise to those kind of awakenings. So, and this is one of the reasons why in Buddhism, the Buddha emphasizes understanding the nature of suffering so much, to the point where the recognition of suffering becomes the first principle upon which you build the entire edifice of your spiritual path. So, and we know, for example, even from our modern experience, the Second World War gave us a changed world, where concept of universality of human rights became the underpinning of all civilized systems. There was a concept of fairness brought in. Many of the labor protection laws came in. More humane approach to a lot of things came from that, because humanity and society, human beings were traumatized by the experience of the war, particularly the Holocaust experience. How far can humans go if we really demonize a particular group of people? Holocaust is a powerful reminder to us that we have that capacity to go all the way and become beasts. And, really, so all of these trauma, and once the dust settled, gave a new awakening, gave a changed world, which really created the basis for long-term stability in the world, at least in the Western part of the world. I think this COVID-19 crisis, if we seize the moment, has that type of opportunity. So and that's why I hope, conversations like our podcast series will start this. And, it's not just going to be this small group and you leading the conversation, but hopefully many others will join and amplify that discourse, so that we collectively think through, and it's not a question of our system is better than yours. It's a broader question is what is best for humanity? What is best for the members of a given society? And there's also an important learning to take place from each other. If a particular way of doing things has proven to be actually better in one part of the world, why can't we not adopt it, and learn from it? There's a huge mutual learning that can happen. So I think those are broader meta issues, which I hope that more and more people will give thought. And as and I personally see this kind of podcast series as a way of providing a platform to collectively think aloud, because nobody can come up with a fully fleshed out ideas. If there are such geniuses, many of the world's problems would be solved. On the other hand, I do believe in the kind of Indian and Tibetan model of emergence of insights, which are really more of a dialogical process rather than the Western model of Newton sitting under the apple tree and apple falls down and ping comes the gravitation kind of discovery. That's a very individualistic notion of how knowledge is generated. I tend to believe more in the Indian and Tibetan version, where knowledge and true insights really emerge in the context of a conversation and dialogue and exchange of ideas. So my hope is that these podcast series will offer that platform to collectively think aloud, so that, and then nuggets of wisdom, as you put it, Rob, would emerge, which can then be probably made actionable. So to go to your specific question about compassion, one of the exciting things about our time is that there is now a new participant in the dialogue on the discourse on compassion, which is science. Up until recently, discourse on compassion was confined to religion, philosophers, and moral thinkers. And so far as science was concerned, to begin with, they were very suspicious of emotion. And then as emotion research progressed, they are now beginning to look at something like compassion and empathy. And now they're realizing actually you can see rudimentary versions of empathy and compassion even in non-human primates. And then the thinking logic goes, if we see them in non-human primates, then clearly there's deep evolutionary roots here. And then, hey, what have we missed here? And then because the entire, sort of evolutionary biology-based conception of human nature was modeled on this idea of pursuit of self-interest as being the only primary driver of human behavior, excluding other powerful, more connecting, caring, nurture-seeking instincts of our species. And now the new science of compassion is opening up that discourse and say, hey, look, if we don't bring in empathy and compassion as part of our deeper biological makeup, evolutionary makeup, then we won't be able to have a full picture of human nature. And this is where I think this discourse on compassion really has the power. And also now clinical science is beginning to show actually even on the personal level, the more opening your heart to compassion, acting out from your empathy, allowing your empathic response to feel connected is actually good for us. In some paradoxical way, if you truly care for your well-being, self-centeredness is not a smart way to do it. Opening up, feeling connected with others. And that makes perfect sense because we're deeply, deeply social creatures. We crave for recognition, we crave for affection, we crave for connection. And here, William James was right. He said one of the most powerful human sentiments is the need for recognition, need to be seen. And that is a powerful, because each of us need to be affirmed, valued. And so we are beginning to realize, and this whole field of social, understanding the social nature of human beings is a new. Actually, we haven't quite yet seen what the implications are. There's a quite a powerful book that was written by Yale scientist called The Blueprint, which is I can never fully remember his name. It's I think it was George Pitakis. But it's a book called The Blueprint, and it's a scientist bringing anthropological perspective in fleshing out what are the implications of truly recognizing our deep social nature. And I think these are exciting discoveries, which I think will now inform the whole, movement like our Compassion Institute, my own Compassion Institute, to disseminating the awareness of the value of compassion, as well as, conveying the simple idea that we can nurture it. There are techniques and skills we can use to nurture it, enhance it, amplify it, and apply it.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful. As you were speaking, I was trying to find the Yale professor because I know the book you're speaking of. So we'll include that in the show notes. We'll make sure to have a link to that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I hope he will be able to, come on one of your.
We can speak with him.
Episodes, yeah.
We're looking forward to the many different thought leaders around the world that we'll be speaking with, and my many thanks to the two of you for helping to make introductions to a wide variety of people who can help just bring out different parts of this conversation, and so we can hear all kinds of ideas and thoughts around it. And just as we close, Ashish, is there anything that you hope for that comes out of this conversation for the listeners?
So, Rob, just one thing, which is the primary motive, I had, is the focus needs to be humanitarian, human-oriented, human flourishment, human empowerment. Unfortunately, pretty much all decisions, or most of the decisions I've seen in the pandemic so far, have at least a bias. If not completely, they were biased towards economic contribution and economic impact. So while economy is a very important part of our life, unless we put some focus on the actual human condition, and as Jinpa accurately pointed in the beginning, use this reset to reposition our lenses and refocus on the underlying human condition and how we can make life on this small rock better for everybody. And the economic prosperity will follow. When people are happy, countries are happy, economies are happy. So I think if at the end we can give a platform, we can instigate a dialogue, as Jinpa was rightly saying, I think the better things will follow. I think Thomas Roosevelt said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So at the minimum, this podcast will give hope to all the listeners and constituents that we do care. And with that care, hopefully more compassion would be founded and better results to follow.
Well, thank you for bringing this to the forefront to get us talking about it and getting the conversation started. And Jinpa, any last words?
No, actually, I'm actually quite excited, and I hope that more and more, people would join in this conversation, and as much as possible, if we can bring diverse perspectives, and then in the process, a lot of nuggets of wisdom might emerge, and some of the, guests, speakers may even have very practical suggestions on small things, simple things that we can do in the immediate. So I'm actually quite excited by the prospect, at least starting a conversation. And, once again, thank you, Ashish, for really kind of, initiating all of this and bringing the initial energy and pushing me. And then thank you, Rob, for really kind of picking up on our proposal with such enthusiasm. And let's hope that more and more people will join the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks to the two of you and to all the listeners. I wish you much love and gratitude. Thank you for listening in, and I'm confident you'll enjoy the conversation as we go along with this series.
Thank you.